All right. Welcome, everybody. This is SIG VMware, last call of the year. So we're going to have a quick recap of what happened last week at KubeCon, since most people were there. And then we're going to have a short meeting today since most of the other SIGs that canceled. We're getting close to Christmas week, the holiday break. So most people just want to spend some time with their families. So let's kick it off with the community updates.
Okay, on the community update front, I think the biggest thing and the only thing that I've been involved with was KubeCon North America in Seattle, which was all last week. There were a number of sessions related to running Kubernetes on vSphere infrastructure. So I've put links to these, both videos and decks, in the meeting notes. There's a few of them I haven't filled in yet, but I promise I'll have those done within the hour so that if somebody goes back and wants to find those. I did have trouble hunting down the video recording of the cloud provider deep dive, so maybe somehow that didn't get recorded, but I'm going to keep searching. But in theory, all the decks and videos should be somewhere, and I'll post them in the meeting notes. Other than that, I'd anticipate we don't have a speaker or demo coming up this week for today's meeting, and I think that we're going to cancel the next one too, and that's it. A short community update here.
Yeah, I think we're definitely gonna cancel the next one, as the next SIG VMware call lands on January 3rd, which is again in the middle of the holiday break for most folks. So we're going to send out a cancellation for that. We're going to resume on January 17th. Yes.
And by the way, our SIG, every SIG within Kubernetes has a slot to present up in a roll up to the Kubernetes community SIG. And our slot comes due the first week of January. So I'm going to be reporting on things like the cluster API, the vSphere cloud provider, the CSI. So if anybody wants to feed me last minute updates on that, go for it, because I have to put together a presentation on it for a delivery in first week of January. Thanks.
Yeah, and we're gonna, give a brief update on what happened on the active projects update right now. Active projects update for cluster API. You want to give it that look?
Yeah. So last week we were at KubeCon, and there really isn't any update other than the fact that we're focused right now on integration tests. And Steve, I know that we did a demo the previous SIG VMware. We also did a demo at the Cluster API vSphere bi-weekly on Monday. So if you want to show a demo at the community, whatever.
I think, no, they actually used to be pretty open-ended on the format and pushed out a template for an official slide deck that's, I don't know, it seems like 20 pages. I was surprised how big it was, but I don't think a demo is in there. So, and it looked long enough now that I think thanks for the offer, but I think it doesn't really fit.
I think maybe just pointing at it during the presentation will be probably good enough, like just putting a link there, or maybe.
Yeah, or what I could put in the slide deck is a link to a video recording if we have one. That might be better than actually.
We have the video recording on our main repo. I'll grab the link on the main repo and then send it to you.
Okay, that'd be a big help. Thanks.
The other thing that you can mention is that the vSphere provider is pretty much up to date with the main repo. We've done the full conversion to CRD a month or two back. All of our code for our CI infrastructure and testing is in our repo. All of our code for the building of the OVA artifact is in the repo. So it's pretty significant that we have everything in one repo and we're caught up. I I don't believe that other providers can say the same thing.
And I
Okay,
think
so you've moved on from cluster API to cloud provider here, right?
No, I'm still talking about cluster API.
Oh, okay.
there's also a related news to cluster API and also to cloud provider and CSI, which is that we tagged the very first version on the Git repo for all of them. So we have version 0.1.0 for cluster API provider for vSphere, cloud provider for vSphere, and CSI provider for vSphere. So we have all three projects tagged as a 0.1.0 version, which I guess we can consider that an alpha version of, I would say, the first stab at the implementation of these projects. So it's a decent milestone since we started, working on all these efforts. 4 or 5 months ago, 6 months ago, maybe cluster API.
Yeah.
Even since there was no cluster API before. So I think it's a pretty big milestone on its own. And there's I think Steve has put link in the meeting notes for the session that Ulok and Chris Nova, now also from VMware, since the Apptio acquisition closed last week, and the presentation that you guys did at KubeCon last week on cluster API, which is pretty interesting and very well attended. I have a picture of the room, and it was gigantic room.
Yeah.
It was packed. So.
Steve, I provided a link in the chat.
Okay, thanks.
So I also want to point out, and we emphasized this at KubeCon last week, that the vSphere provider supports both the self-service workflow and the management cluster workflow. Even though that we're focused on exploring the management cluster workflow, we support the self-service model also.
So let me ask you this, the cluster API is suitable for vSphere. Is there any thought of enabling it for Workstation and Fusion at some point in the future?
I
mean, it's just a wild idea, and a lot of people's laptops aren't necessarily up to staging like a 3-node cluster, but some people might be interested in it.
I think there's and this is again just wildly speculating, really. I was attending Cluster Lifecycle earlier this week, and there's a proposal from the Minikube folks. I don't understand if it's a proposal or if it's something they've been working on for quite some time, and now they're ready to, graduate that feature into either the Minikube repo or even a separate project altogether, which is a multi-node Minikube or multi-cluster Minikube. Now I don't remember exactly if it's a
multi-node. Yeah,
which is kind of similar in approach to what you were describing now. So it's an interesting overlap. I think maybe worth exploring.
That is an interesting idea. I don't even know what APIs you would use to create a provision VM on Fusion. I mean, Minikube does it. Docker Machine does it somehow. So
yeah, there definitely is an API, and I can't say I've ever written against it myself. So if we were real lucky, it would look very similar to the one for vSphere.
I can speak for that because I built the API for Fusion. So
okay.
So I know exactly what we're talking about.
What does the API look like?
So it's a REST API. It's an endpoint that Fusion and now Workstation has that is basically giving you It's a separate API. It's not vModel, so it's a REST JSON based API. It's very basic. It just gives you basically control over the life cycle of the VM, and it's not shelling out to any of the executables that are bundled within Fusion and Workstation. It's actually using the what's called the Vigor API, which is like the internal API that talks to
the Vigor, yeah. So
we might have a guy here who maybe you can pretend he just volunteered to do like the Go version to minimize the effort.
It's
Well,
actually built in Go because I wrote that in Go. That was
but we could probably use the Docker machine APIs for that, right? Since that's what Minikube uses.
so there's an interesting thing because so this API was built a long time ago as part of a different effort at VMware. It was called App Catalyst. Some of you may remember that.
Yeah.
It was like a free version of Fusion, and it had an API. And that API ended up being into the Fusion product now and the workstation. And the API hasn't changed much. There was a Docker machine driver that will implement that API, which was built for App Catalyst, and it's still out there. It's actually still on GitHub. So there is an implementation for that. It's also built on Swagger, so there's a Swagger spec for that API. So it's kind of easy to use. It's also very small. Like it's not like a big API.
Well, I was suggesting using the Docker machine because then we could run it across all the desktop hypervisor, not just VMware.
Yeah, and
gets us some brownie points.
No, absolutely. And again, if we ever want to use that API endpoint in Fusion and Workstation, we'll have a Docker machine driver already because it's there.
So wait, who's volunteering to do this over their holiday break?
I think it's a topic for the first meeting of 2019.
Yeah, I think that's a very cool idea. I mean, Fabio has an ESX provisioner for Cluster API, but it's not the same. It's still not as easy to use as doing it just straight to Fusion. So it's an interesting idea.
There's I was working on as part of my working on ESX, the ESX provider for Cluster API, which is again, it's just part of the vSphere provider. It's just a different code path inside the same provider. So it's not like a separate provider you have to download, but it works against a single ESX. So as part of that, I was building, given that I was a heavy user of Vagrant, and still is, and you can actually build an ESX box with Vagrant and Packer. So I wrote like those Packer Packer templates script a long time ago that I keep updated as new versions of ESX come out. And I managed to build a box and use it, for my own testing. So this is obviously mostly for testing, and since you don't really want to run ESX in a virtual machine unless you really have to, and there are some good use cases actually for nested virtualization, but you can have like a one command ESX box come up with a Vagrant up command, and then run Cluster API against it, pretty easily. So that will be another interesting thing to bring to fruition.
I think that's good for those of us who work at VMware. For people on the outside, they don't even know that you can download ESXi for free. So
well, there's some interesting use cases for nested virtualization, even at larger scale, like not just on your desktop for development, which is obviously nice and works. You can also create clusters, not just single ESX hosts. You can download multiple boxes, have multi VM Vagrant environments, and so on. So you can actually build something cool out of it. There's also interesting use cases like a dev test deployments of infrastructure that then you deploy locally, or you deploy through AWS or whatever.
Well, what I was trying to refer to is that, I mean, before I came to VMware, I was like, I don't know vSphere. Don't I would tell the IT guys, don't ask me how to use vSphere. I just want a VM. And I think that's a general comment from non-VMware or users.
Mm-hmm.
So what Steve was suggesting might appeal more to those people.
Let's talk more about that on the next meeting, the first meeting in 2019. It's gonna be an interesting thing to talk about. Well, maybe with more people attending.
Yeah.
I mean, the only one issue that I see with that there's like if you do with vFusion, yeah, you can create VMs, you can install everything, but like the vSphere cloud provider, for instance, that might not. I mean, you can't really set that up because for that you need again a vCenter server. So yeah, you can probably create a different variant of the Kubernetes cluster, which is just pure non-cloud provider. But then the question is like, okay, what value are we trying to do? Because essentially, for example, someone using a Mac, like they install Docker. Docker already has like the Docker, like Kubernetes enable Kubernetes in Docker, right? So yeah, I mean, I guess we might have to see like what additional value are we giving. I mean, if it truly replicates a smaller environment for people or developers who want to quickly build against something on their desktop and then move that up the stack to a bigger production cluster, if that's the use case, then
it's not a use case for customers necessarily. It's more of getting the community more involved. I mean, we can start something like that and let the community run with it. We don't necessarily have to be the owner of that, especially if we base it on Docker machine APIs.
No, but what I'm saying is like for the vSphere provider, right? I mean, you would not be able to, for example, as I said, like you might not be able to set up, say, the vSphere cloud provider in this, let's say, a 2-node cluster itself.
Yeah.
There is no VC. So
I think it's more like something that can be considered a different use case from the traditional vSphere use case.
Right.
Something different. It's not like not targeting the same audience, the same type of user.
Exactly. So I think maybe what would be good is like, I mean, I also like the idea in general, but I guess we may want to maybe clearly hash out what the use case we're trying to go with, like who will be the target audience, just clearly spec that out.
Developers. This is not a production use case.
No, not production use case, but even for a developer, right? I mean, as I'm saying, like if the developer app that they're developing, if it needs a let's say persistent volume, well, if this environment can't give them a persistent volume, then will they ever use this for development? I don't know, right?
I think that's exactly the type of conversation I want to have at the next meeting. Like, after pondering on this idea for some time, is it actually a good idea? Is it like worthwhile to discuss? Is it, does that have any upside doing this or not? And that's exactly why I was trying to push, this conversation to the next meeting, because I think it's an interesting concept, and I think it has some merits, but maybe it's not needed. Maybe people don't.
Well, I mean, even with the Docker support for Kubernetes, what do you do about persistent volume there, right? So it's I think this is a great idea, and doesn't need to support every use case, because we're not targeting it for production. This is for like the community who, I wouldn't say that we necessarily spend a lot of time on it, but we can maybe help kickstart it and let the community run with it. It wouldn't be hosted in vSphere provider repo. It would probably be another repo.
Yeah, definitely is going to be separate from the current. Anyway, I think it's a good topic. Maybe we just want to put that in the agenda for the next meeting. I'm actually going to do that in the discussion.
Cool.
Besides that, and the tagging of the new versions of CSI and Cloud Provider, I don't think there's much else since we have spent last week at KubeCon.
Nope.
And since we have not many people attend today, unless we have somebody coming up with some discussion topics, which I'm pretty sure that people just want to go back and enjoy their time off, or they're winding down work before the holidays. I'm just gonna give you guys a happy holiday. Have a good break. See you next year, 2019, January 17th, same hour, same day. I'll see you guys.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
See you guys. Bye.
Yeah,
Bye.
go ahead and change the on that.
Bye.